Hello everybody and welcome to this webinar where we're talking about retention and stewardship in individual giving. We're thrilled by the response we've had to the webinar with over 530 people register and we're really pleased that you've come along today to hear what we have to say. For those that aren't familiar with Woods Valldata, I just wanted to introduce the company to you so that you can find out a little bit more about what we do. So our purpose is to help charities raise more funds for their causes. We do all these services. We do raffle, weekly lottery, response handling, fulfillment, digital scanning, direct debit processing, data strategy and insight. We've been around for about 40 years and we currently work with over 75 charity partners. We have PCI, ISO, Gambling Commission compliance, and we are an external lottery manager as well. If you want to find out any more about Woods Valldata, please go along to our website or contact us on charities@woodsvalldata.co.uk. Just look back through all of that. We've got the presentation going and we will have a slide on screen all day, all of the webinar today. We're hoping that you can see the subtitles that are coming in, so for anybody that would like to read what we're saying as we're saying it, that should be coming in. We're trialling that for this webinar. I'm Helen Daw. Good morning, Head of Marketing at Woods Valldata and your host for the next hour. Hopefully you won't hear very much of what I've got to say because we're joined by a fantastic panel today of fundraising specialists. We've got our very own Helen Daw, our Head of Data Strategy and Insight, who you're probably familiar with if you've attended to one of our webinars before. And we're absolutely thrilled to be joined by Dan Fluskey, Head of Policy and External Affairs at the Chartered Institute of Fundraising, and Elisabeth Stodel, Supported Development Manager at MSF UK. Good morning, guys, and thank you for giving your time today to talk to us. A little bit of housekeeping before we start. I wanted to introduce you to Emma Corbett. Emma's going to be in the background just making sure everything runs as smoothly as possible. If you see her name in the panel, that's why she's here. Hi, Emma. Emma's the Business Development Director at Woods Valldata, so please feel free to drop her a line if you're interested in anything that we're talking about or you want to talk about anything that Woods Valldata do. You can reach her at charities@woodsvalldata.co.uk. In your Zoom screen, you should have a panel, and that panel will have a chat function, so please feel free to use that if you want to start a conversation with anyone during the session. Just make sure you address it to all attendees, otherwise it will come through to the panel only. And if you've got any questions today, please use the Q&A box or icon to ask questions, and we will look at answering those during the session. We're going to start today with a brief introduction into retention and stewardship by Helen. We'll then have a discussion around some hot topics in retention and stewardship, looking at how retention and stewardship has changed over time, strategies and best practice, measurement and tracking, and whatever questions that you have as well. We are recording the webinar and it will be available on demand as a link after today. We'll email that out to everybody that's registered. So if you or your colleagues would like to see this webinar afterwards, it will be available for you. So without any more ado, I would like to introduce Helen Daw. She's Head of Data Strategy and Insights at Woods Valldata, and she works closely with our charities and account directors to support their fundraising activities, delivering actionable insights and data strategy recommendations alongside wider charity benchmarking and trend analysis. Helen brings with her experience of working within the charity sector and working on data and CRM planning and insight projects. She's compiled a report to go alongside the webinar today on retention and stewardship, and that report will be available after this session, so don't forget to look out for that. Helen, over to you. Thanks.
Thanks, Helen. I'm just going to share my screen. Oh, hang on. There we go. Okay. Hope you can all see that okay. Okay, so
sorry, Helen, sorry to interrupt you. Could you put your could you put on your subtitles?
It's just coming up there. I think
yeah,
it was
there they are.
getting going.
Thanks.
It's quietly saying listening. So yeah, we're just trialing this one today. So hopefully it will work.
Yeah, just sorry, Helen, just a quick one on that. If you didn't want to see the subtitles, there is a way of switching it off.
That's okay. I'm good.
Yeah,
Don't worry.
in terms of the attendees on the button.
Oh, I see. Sorry.
Yeah, just in case you wanted to sort of switch that off, that functionality can be switched off. Top right hand corner, apparently, if you choose select swap video share screen, I'll pop it on the chat as well.
Oh,
sorry, I'll leave you to
no,
it.
that's good. Thank you. Cool. So individual giving income, it's one of our major sources of income as a charity, and we spend a lot of time, obviously, being so important, trying to grow and develop our individual giving income ongoing. It's never easy recruiting individual giving supporters, and it's always expensive. It's quite hard to do. And so once we get them on board, we want to keep them and grow them and take them on a journey with us so that we can maximize our individual giving income over time from them. And more importantly, lifetime value and return on investment for that important money that we've spent recruiting them. In the current times, it's been quite interesting and challenging, actually. So I feel like it's become even more important, and it's definitely a hot topic. People are talking about it a lot more at the moment. It's something that I think has always been there. It's always been talked about, but perhaps not taken to its full potential. And that's something that's really changing with everything that's gone on. As everything with COVID, it changes things, it's catalyzed things, it's opened up opportunities alongside challenges. So, and I think retention and stewardship is somewhere where that's happened. I think probably one of the key areas that it's really changed is around the fact that new channels have opened up. So with COVID, face-to-face recruitment, for example, and events stopped overnight and have struggled to come back in their full way that they used to. So one of our major recruitment channels has been shut down as a result, and in a good way, we've had to diversify, use new channels, and we've opened up into DRTV and digital and tried to do new things, which is really exciting for us all. What that has meant from a retention and stewardship perspective is it's actually, a new opportunity and something that we need to learn about and understand. If we're getting new supporters in, and actually we have got lots of new supporters coming in online. Charity Benchmarks report demonstrated that the number of one-off gifts coming in online is much higher this year than we've ever seen before, which is great news. But it means we've got new people coming in online to us that we want to keep. We want to generate engaging, long-lasting relationships with these people. But who are they? Are they different? How do they need to be spoken to? So there's lots of challenges and opportunities around retention and stewardship at the moment that are making it quite an exciting space to be in. Additionally, of course, we've got our traditional supporters, the ones that kept us going when COVID first hit, and we all sat there going, oh my goodness, what's going to happen now? Is everyone going to cancel their regular gift? Will they be able to give? We need to do an emergency appeal. Is anyone going to actually respond to us? And they did. They kept their regular gift. They supported our emergency appeals and our ongoing cash asks like they always have done, but actually in bigger numbers. So again, we know our current supporters and our supporters back then are actually vitally important to us. And I think that's the other thing that's come from COVID is it's just flagged how important our supporters are to us, and therefore the need to talk to them and thank them and build those relationships with them. I think the other thing that I've really noticed at the moment as well, before we move on, is just how that's being mirrored in the wider world. There's lots of reports out there and articles, and again, within the conferences over the last year or so, retention and stewardship has been a real focus point. There's a Gartner report where they're talking about how most senior business leaders have retention and loyalty as one of their major focus points from the year ahead, and lots of articles and chat about there at the moment around brand and loyalty in the new digital virtual world. How do we make those work? How do we engage with people and keep them with us when everything is a lot different and transient potentially? So yeah, real focus area for lots of business areas, including obviously charities. So moving forward, The importance of it really, as we've highlighted, is around generating lifetime value and therefore income. And the only way to do that is to build a strong relationship with our supporters, and ideally as much of a two-way personal relationship with our supporters as we possibly can. Moving into one-off gifts, we're going to have a look at one-off gifts and then regular giving within the light of retention and stewardship, and hopefully give you some kind of pointers as to what we've seen, what we know works, and how to start to build and think about retention and stewardship within the programs that you do. The first point on one-off gifts is around the first donation. People will come into us, either they found us or we've asked in some way and they've responded, and really getting them from that first gift onto a second gift is what it's all about. Once you've generated a second gift, you can improve retention from around 20-25% up to over 60%. Makes a massive difference. I think that one-off gift, the first one, someone's done something, you've inspired something, and then the real challenge and opportunity for us is to talk to these people and try and get them to engage with us and stay with us into our second gift, and from there you can start to build that relationship. So after the first donation, have a think about thanking. Really important to say thank you to make them feel appreciated. If you do it quickly, and I would say always do it on the first gift. Quite often we can have a think about whether, to include a thank you for lower gifts or to give people a chance to opt out. And I think actually on the first gift, just thank everybody. It's really important on the first engagement with you as a charity for them to feel important and valued. Once done, communicate with them, let them know what you've done with their money. Be very clear as to how important their gift was to you. And then, and sometimes this can feel a bit counterintuitive because you don't want to hassle people, obviously, but asking again quite quickly whilst they're still fresh and engaged with you will work best. Obviously, always test your timings and your flows. You want to get that supporter journey right for you, making sure you don't turn your supporters off, but actually taking them on a journey in the best way possible. Oh, sorry. Oh. After the first donation, then really it's about starting to build that relationship. Try and keep it as two-way as you can, and don't just keep asking, keep in touch, keep informing them of how important their gift is, what's happened to it, information about the charity, but also asking them how they feel about you. How do they like to be communicated with? What do they want to know about? Understanding motivations and trying to make it as personal as you can. Some of the typical activity that we've looked at and worked with clients on, and we've seen some typical percentages from are coming up on screen for you now. So activation, and then a little bit further down the line, reactivation. Devices, strong direct messaging, be really clear with what you want them to do and what you're asking them to do and why you're asking them to do it is really important and one of the best ways to generate a response. Inspire them, motivate them. Once you know maybe what they're interested in, you can then start to tailor that to them, become more personal. Additional draws, things like raffles and prize draws, maybe free gifts and incentives, making things stand out on the doormat a little bit more and encouraging people to open their pack will always help. And then ask levels as well. Think about testing different ask levels, particularly online. If you're asking too much, bring it back down. You can test things very, very easily online and then take that offline, take your learning offline. Loyalty-driven devices. So again, once you've got people on board, have to try and build those relationships. Thanking is always really key, and information about what's happening with the donation that's been given to you. Think about free gifts or collector's items, creative and content, obviously, engaging case studies, personal case studies, always really good using an individual. And then additional draws or any other prize incentives as well can work really well for your prize-led fundraising. And reminders, postcards, emails, they all work really well, particularly if you're honing in on your most responsive segments, actually. They will give you a real return. From a regular giving aspect, it's really, as you would expect, kind of getting that relationship built early and reducing attrition in the early stages. No-show averages can sit around at about 8%, and actually within the first 3 months on certain channels you can see up to 15 to 20% attrition, kind of going up to 30, 40, 50% in the first year. Anything you can do to bring that down is vital. To protect your income, but also to enable you to continue talking to these people and to build those relationships. So anything we can do around those first 3 months in particular and the no-show rates is going to be really, really good. Some of the things that we know work, again, coming up on screen for you. So a regular giving welcome, really, really important, needs to be fast. Most of the no-shows and initial attrition will happen in the first 2 weeks. So you need to be getting in touch straight away as fast as you can and talking to them, engaging them. Will have a big impact, and we've seen up to 10 to 20% reduction in attrition just by getting that welcome pack right. Ongoing upgrades actually work really well. Done in the right way, it can become an engaging conversation. It can become a thank you. So we've seen some really strong response rates on upgrade, and we know ongoing, alongside other triggered communications, that we can see a 40% reduction in attrition overall. So getting those communication points, building that engagement and journey and conversation with regular giving is really important to minimizing that attrition. Another sort of final area to think about is around channel and audience. I touched on it earlier, where things have changed quite fast in our world at the moment. We're doing a lot more online, a lot more virtually. And it's really important to test different channels and different ways of talking to your supporters. And if you can, asking them how they want to be communicated with. How they've been recruited, how they've come online will tend to be an indicator as to how they want to be spoken to ongoing. If they're direct mail, they tend to like direct mail or a telephone call. If they're online, then again, you might need to be thinking about email and social targeting. But do as much as you can to understand what particularly new supporters from new channels look like and what motivates them. Try and develop those relationships so that you're talking to them in the best way you can, in a way that's going to keep them engaged with you and motivate them to give again. And of course, sort of touching on it throughout really, and I know it's a specific section in our chat in a moment, is around measuring it. It's really, really tricky with some of the retention and stewardship activity to know if it works. It's not the same as within a campaign doing an A/B split test. It's, if you're putting a new thanking program in place, you want to be able to thank everybody, but have a think about how you can do it in a way that you can measure it. You're only going to learn if it's working and how to make it better by being able to test something within it. So if you can have a control cell or a fallow cell where you leave them out of the whole thanking process, for example, and be able to compare that to the other activity you're doing, or maybe it's as simple as tracking a new piece of activity against what happened previously, if it's like for like enough. Any way that you can do this activity in a way where you can measure it and understand the impact of it will be really, really valuable for you. So just to summarize, key actions, regularly engage with them to increase their lifetime value. It's very tempting to think, actually, if we just don't talk to them too much, they'll keep, they won't be reminded that we're there. But actually, it's not about that. It's about building that relationship so that you can take them on a journey with you, and hopefully they'll become advocates and legators and activists and volunteers for you as time goes by. Thank your supporters. They need to know that they feel valued and appreciated. So really, really important to do that. But think about how best to do it and what channel to use and when to do it and what content to put in there. Is it an opportunity to share news, share knowledge and share stories? Get to know your new and existing supporters, their preferences, their motivations, etc., to build that lasting relationship, and test and track as much as you can. And then finally, if you can, again, ask them how they want to be talked to, how they want to have an experience with you so that you can make it as positive for them as well as for you. Okay, there's our contact details there. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and open it up to our discussion session, which Helen's going to lead on.
I am, if I remember to start my video and sound again. Okay. If I share this again. then you should be able to see the subtitles. I'm really sorry for everybody that was expecting subtitles during Helen's presentation there. Unfortunately, they didn't work on this occasion, but we will try again in the future. I'm going to go now immediately to a poll and involve all of the participants, the attendees today, and see how important retention and stewardship is for your charity. So if I launch this poll, you should be able to see that on your screens. The first question is, do you currently have a retention and stewardship program as part of your individual giving fundraising? And that's outside of thanking for donations and administrative communications. And if you do, or even if you don't, does the leadership team in your charity, so the trustees or the senior management, do they value retention and stewardship in your charity? And if so, how much? It's kind of a rating scale there on absolutely, yes, 100%. Equally to other activities, not as much as other activities, a bit of a challenge to convince people about it. You don't do it, or you don't do it at all, or sorry, people aren't supportive of it, or you don't do any activity. So I'll just give you a couple of seconds to have a think about that, and we'll see how that comes out. Okay, there's a few more people voting. Just 5 more seconds. So if you haven't voted, vote now. Okay, we'll leave it there. So you'll be able to see what the results are there. So it's interesting, in terms of how many of you currently have a program for retention and stewardship. So that's 61% of the attendees today actually have a program, and 39% don't have a program outside of thanking. So that's very interesting there. And just the leadership team in your charity see value in retention and stewardship activity. 30%, the majority, 35% absolutely do see the value in it. 27% say yes, equally to other activities, and 26%, so about the same number, yes, but not as much as other activities. And then coming down towards the other end where people perhaps may not see the value in it, only 9% see it as a little bit, but a challenge to convince people. Nobody in the senior leadership team don't think it's a good thing to do. That's a double negative. I'm not sure whether I confused myself there, but hopefully that makes sense. And then 3% say they don't do any activity. So resoundingly there at 35%, absolutely and completely, which is a really good thing to hear, that the leadership team in your charity see value in retention and stewardship activity. Thank you for filling that out, and hopefully that helps us understand a little bit about what is happening out there with your charities. So when we talk through this, we're going to open it out to the panel discussion now. We've got some key topics that we are looking to talk through, and we'll maybe do that, but maybe we'll look at some of the questions that have come through first. Before we do that, I want to introduce the panel again to you. We have, we're really thrilled to have with us today two very exciting fundraising professionals. We've got Daniel Fluskey. He's Head of Policy and External Affairs at the Chartered Institute of Fundraising. Daniel leads the Institute's policy development and research work, keeping up to date with member priorities, promoting innovation on fundraising, and working with key stakeholders, including civil servants and politicians, to make sure fundraising and giving are key priorities for the current and future governments. And we're thrilled to have Elisabeth Stodel here as well, Supported Development Manager at MSF UK. She's responsible for the communications to and development of current donors. She comes from 5 years in creative marketing agencies and moved to work in the individual giving team at MSF UK in 2017. First responsible for stewardship, fulfillment and legacy marketing before stepping into her current role. She's brought a new level of personalisation to MSF's stewardship programme and is now using this to enhance the mid-value communications. The fundraising focus of MSF UK is on storytelling and personalisation for donors. As with everyone, MSF UK has had a challenging 15 months during responding to COVID-19 in projects and at HQ, but it's been an exciting time as income and donor recruitment have been high. So challenge, Elisabeth, is to keep it that way. So thank you, everyone. And Helen joins the panel, stays on the panel as well. We've got some questions come in, and I just wanted to share some of those to start with. I think they might be a little bit particular to what Helen's been talking about, but please, Daniel and Elisabeth, if you feel it's something that you'd like to contribute to as well, please do. Let's keep this open. The first questions come through from Lauren, and her question, which I think is relevant to everyone, is what are your top 3 questions to ask a supporter in getting to know them?
It's quite broad. It will slightly depend on your charity, obviously, and what it is that's relevant to you. There's a line, isn't there, between getting personalised and getting too personalised and having too much detail that you can't do anything with. So I'm thinking maybe channel preferences, how they like to be talked to, how often they want to be talked to, or if you're thinking about content and messaging, what interests them, what motivates them. Try and, I would guess, not go too freewheeled on it, and try and give them some options that you can at least kind of group people together around content and creative and messaging. I don't know if anyone's got anything else to add that they experience here.
Yeah, the other thing I would probably add is giving level. So yeah, what level they started giving at, and whether they want to be asked at a similar level. Sometimes we might have supporters who've given just once to an event, and they'll have given a one-off gift at a level that actually isn't the kind of level they'd want to be asked at going forward. So I think giving level is important as well.
And just to add that, I think there's probably 3 main areas, I guess. So something which tries to capture why they're supporting us. So are they a direct beneficiary? Is somebody in their family? Is it that they, it's a cause or an area which has been close to their heart? So something about why they're giving. The contact preferences, of course, as Helen has said. And then maybe I'd also kind of say about the non-fundraising stuff. Is there anything else you'd like to do with us? Volunteering, campaigning, signing up for these other things, because people are more than their one transaction and relationship. There's a whole range of things that we want to do, and to be able to try to get more information on other things that they might be interested in doing is a really good thing around a longer stewardship bit, because it might be that the stewardship for them is not about step-by-step incremental increases in donation amount. It might be they are giving at this level, but they are also doing this as a volunteer, and they're also taking part in these campaigns or whatever. So something like that. And the other thing I would just say around that, though, and I think Helen mentioned it in her piece, was the more knowledge is a great thing, but the more you ask and the more that people are telling you, then maybe you're raising their expectations of what you're going to do with it. So if you have asked somebody, for example, why you're supporting us, and it's a cancer charity, and the person tells you, I am someone who has had cancer or is experiencing cancer, and then in your future communications, you aren't reflecting that and you're not using that, then you might not be, that might actually be leading to a slightly poorer relationship, because they're saying, look, I have told you I have had cancer, and you're writing to me as somebody who doesn't recognize that in your experience. So it's just a note really to kind of say knowledge is great, and the more we can find out about people, the better. But when we're asking those questions and when we're finding out that information, just be mindful about how we're going to use it, and whether that does raise any level of expectations which you possibly need to be able to meet in those future engagements with them.
Yeah, I think that is a really important point, making sure that the information that you're collecting is going to be relevant for your future communications and what you do with that, because otherwise there will be questions, won't there, from the donors as to why you've asked them in the first place, if that's then not reflected. So I think that's a very important point. The next question that's come through, in fact, there's a few questions around timing. So what's the best time to ask an upgrade, ask in the journey? Maybe another question, is there a particular time frame we should stick to when doing a second or third ask, such as within a few weeks or months? And maybe tied into that is, how much contact is too much? So thinking about timing there, when's the best time to do upgrades? When's the best time to do a second and third ask? And do you think there's too much contact?
Did you guys want to go first? I've obviously got a bit of a view from what we see, but
yeah, I'm happy to do a first bit. I think I'm going to slightly dodge the first bit around the first time to ask and the first upgrade, just because I think probably Elisabeth may be better to talk from a kind of personal practical experience. I think the thing that I would say generally is whatever program you've got and whatever timescales you've got, that there needs to be some flexibility in there, because although there are, through testing and through the work that Helen and so on see, there are going to be more optimal times than others, but we also need to be responsive to what's happening in the world or what situation people are going to be in. So, for example, if no one had planned that 2020 and 2021 were going to be pandemic years, your stewardship program and your retention program would have needed to adapt and respond to what people are going through at this time. So thinking about an upgrade, it doesn't necessarily be, well, it has to be 3 to 4 weeks. We have to do it in that point if we know at that point a lockdown has just hit. So we need to be able to be kind of responding. It has to be relevant. It has to be mindful of the situation and the context within which that person is going to receive that piece of communication. So I think I would always bear that in mind when talking generally about frameworks, but I think it is good to have a general kind of outline of a process and a framework. Second question, around how much is too much, probably less than you think it is. I think and I don't know if this kind of comes from issues around kind of GDPR recently and kind of a bit of a kind of worry about pressurizing or being deemed to be contacting too much. I think charities generally, individual charities probably overall are a little bit on the safe side in terms of how much time is a good number or is an okay number. And one of the things, again, kind of reflecting during the pandemic, is I think one of the bigger issues maybe that we've experienced is a hesitancy to ask and to keep talking to people and to keep talking to our supporters during a difficult time. I think some trustees or some organisations have been very cautious and said, oh, well, we can't ask people at the moment because there's a pandemic on, or that I think you can. And people are telling, and I think research and focus group shows that people are happy to be asked, but that ask needs to be relevant. So you can ask during a pandemic and you can ask more than once, but you need to reflect that situation. You need it to be talking about what you're doing in the moment to get through the pandemic and how your cause is still relevant to a changing situation. If you play it like that, you can ask more. You can ask probably more than you think you can, and people are much more likely to tell you when it is too much than the opposite. People aren't going to be. People are very unlikely to not tell you they're not hearing enough, but you could probably err a little bit more on maybe we can add a couple more of communications in, but those might be more check-in type communications rather than ask communications, or impact communications around the difference your donation has made rather than can you give us more.
Yeah, I completely agree with that, Daniel. So yeah, we actually only send 2 to 3 appeals a year to our donors. So it's not very much, I think, compared to quite a lot of charities. But then what we do as well is send a monthly email and a quarterly newsletter, which is kind of a journalistic magazine, style magazine, which is just stories from the field. And actually we make quite a lot of money through that magazine and the emails, because people give because they're engaged, because they're interested in our work, not because we're actually asking them for the donation. And then I think, yeah, you touched upon kind of the fact that you need to make those appeals relevant. For example, last year you could ask a bit more, but something we did there as well was acknowledge people's situation and support. So we said to them, yeah, we understand this is a difficult time. We appreciate that you're already giving a regular gift, but if you can give again, then please do. So kind of, yeah, being very careful to acknowledge what supporters are already doing, I think is really, really important. And then the other question, when to ask new donors. So I think one of the questions was around kind of how long to leave it after somebody's made their first donation. I believe the average is about 6 weeks, but at MSF we actually kind of leave it more like 2 to 3 months. And yeah, the reason we do that is just because we know that our supporters, depending on when they're giving in the giving cycle, also will have received our magazine and the emails. And then yeah, we feel like that's the right time, and that's something we've tested. I think it's about talking to your supporters as well. So we run focus groups and kind of ask them those questions, like when do you think it is the right time? And obviously sometimes they will respond in a way that actually doesn't reflect what they're doing, their actions. So I think it's important to test as well. But those two things I think are really important. And then the question about upgrades. So at MSF, we send an upgrade appeal to our direct debit donors every 2 years. We only start sending that a year after they've been giving. So they have to have been giving a direct debit for a year before we would send that upgrade to them, that upgrade appeal to them. But we get a massive response to that. Last upgrade we sent, we got an ROI of 14 and a 9% response to the upgrade appeal. So it's really successful. And yeah, in the meantime, I think it's just, yeah, that stewardship thing, which I could just go on about for a long time. It's a lot of the time you don't actually have to ask. It's about engaging the supporters in the charity and what we're doing.
I've seen that quite a lot actually in other charities as well, where you're not asking, you're just communicating, but the amount of response that then comes back can be quite huge, can't it?
Yeah, and I think, yeah, definitely the more that you kind of try and personalize or kind of acknowledge what that supporter is already doing. So for example, we'll put personalized text, like if it's a regular donor, we'd always say, oh, thank you for your regular support. Depending on if it's an event donor, you'd say thank you so much for holding an event for us. Like those kind of things, I think acknowledging those helps a lot as well.
Helen, do you have anything else to add in terms of timeframes? We've got
just quickly, we tend to see that quite a quick second ask or response will work really well. I think it's that theory that someone's done something and they're engaged and wanting to kind of hear more from you. But I'm with Elisabeth, really. You need to test that carefully, test different timings and see how your supporters respond, and keep an eye on your opt-outs and your preferences at that point as well. They'll give you a bit of a steer, as well as, you know, complaints or people not responding. You know, there are different ways to monitor that you need to keep an eye on. But yeah, we tend to see quite a quick turnaround works well, but where you're happy to have that and what works best for your charity, whether that's 6 weeks or 2 or 3 months or actually 6 months, will potentially vary, I think, and needs to be tested.
Yeah, I think something to add there as well is the type of donors. So we had a big influx of donors during COVID, and that's because we're not sure still really whether they were giving to the fact that we were working with COVID, or whether they were giving to MSF UK and all of our work. And so that type of donor, I think, yeah, we'd be more careful to send them kind of very much emergency response type appeals. Whereas if, yeah, kind of our more kind of standard kind of regular donors that will come on board, we know we can send them stuff that's kind of more about some of our long-term work. So it's a very different type of communications for those two types of donors.
And if can I just kind of jump in quick, just to reflect a couple of things I've seen in the chat as well, is that a lot of what we've talked about so far is about sending things, and that may, you know, it's probably both kind of direct mail and emails. But particularly over the last year, I think we have seen a lot of organisations do more or go back to telephone calls, check-in calls, more personal thing. And what we see from some of the stuff that we're seeing across the sector, as well as individual anecdote, that has worked really well. You know, people getting a personalised call during a crisis is, you know, people are welcoming that. People are liking the fact that you are taking the time to call them, to check how they are, to see how they're doing, to talk to them about how your work maybe has changed during the pandemic and why your support is so, you know, is so brilliant that they're still supporting you. So it was just, I'm sure people wouldn't be, but you know, when we're talking about sending or communicating, that incorporates a wide scope of activity and communication, not just the sending of direct mail or emails. It's about that scope of things and understanding that people do do respond differently to different types of things, but the more personal and the more individual always seems to work better.
I think something, yeah, that I've seen in the chat there as well is some questions around kind of like the original thank you, and then kind of like what that year of stewardship looks like before we ask anyone to upgrade. So I think, yeah, just to say on that, we will send either a handwritten thank you card or a letter that is quite a long form letter with a story from somebody, a staff member working in a project. And the thank you can be very personalized, the type of donation that somebody's made, kind of reflecting exactly how they gave. They'll get a thank you email if they gave online. We'll be very careful to kind of reflect the way that that person gave. And then that year's stewardship. So as I said, the quarterly magazine, 2 to 3 emergency appeals, and a monthly email if people have opted into email is kind of like the basic journey. Then there are various triggered mailings. For example, face-to-face supporters will receive a thank you after a month after their first donation. So kind of just trying to retain those donors and lower that attrition of those supporters. And then also a triggered mailing at 12 months to thank them again. So yeah, lots of extra thanking as well within that.
Great. And I think at this point, maybe we start to think about the first topic area that we were looking at as part of this, which was around how retention and stewardship has potentially changed over the last how retention and stewardship has potentially changed over time. Certainly before the pandemic, before COVID-19, during the pandemic, and I know Daniel, you've already touched on that, as has Elisabeth, in terms of how things have changed pre-COVID in terms of what's happening now. Do you think there's been a big change? Do you think there needs to be a change now that we've got new supporters in, maybe coming in through different channels, maybe a different type of supporter? What kinds of changes are you seeing? Elisabeth, what have you been seeing in MSF UK?
So yeah, I think, first of all, I think a lot of charities will have seen this, a big influx in online donations. So yeah, just the way people are giving, first of all, has changed. That doesn't mean that we don't carry on sending them postal communications. Like, that's still the most effective way to receive donations. But I think keeping them informed of our work kind of as much through the channels that they're given as well. So as I said, we've got this monthly email that goes out, and we've kind of branded that as something separate to our supporter magazine. And so if supporters have opted into that email, then they'll be getting that, but then everyone will also get that magazine. So we've got those two kind of like key channels there. I think responding to donors, as I just said, in different ways. So I think in the past, in 2016, we had the Aleppo crisis, and also that we had an influx of donors giving to Yemen. We didn't actually jump on them quickly enough, and we lost a lot of those donors. So we updated our program. So after Christmas, we get an influx of donors at Christmas most years. We've introduced a February mailing, which goes to all of the cash donors, and actually that's given us an injection of around 200k every year. It gets a good response. We'll continue to monitor that. And then the type of appeal that you send, that first appeal, so that cash appeal, we tend to send something that's kind of a shorter copy, because quite a lot of our communications are quite a lot to read, like a lot of stories, a lot going on, a lot of information. So actually we kind of tried to cut that down, and we did that as well for our Yemen appeal this year in spring, which went really well. It was very concise, very easy to read, very clear, and it's just kind of like balancing that with your longer term, more loyal supporters, who you're then acknowledging their donation, acknowledging their loyalty, and acknowledging the fact that they've been giving for a long time, and staying with them and appreciating that. So I think generally I think it's just continuing to inform supporters of what we're doing, but just balancing that in the right way for the right donor.
So do you think the message changes as well then, or has the message changed?
No, I don't think so. I don't think the message has changed. I think just the way that we ask and the way that we talk to our supporters maybe varies.
Daniel, have you seen any research around the impact of COVID-19 or the changes that coming through for retention and stewardship across the last 18 months?
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, I think that I mean a lot of that kind of data and research is still kind of coming through. So I think it's probably slightly too early to be able to give the definitive picture of what happened during the pandemic, because a lot of that, there's a bit of a time lag on the information.
Yes.
But what is there, I think, is basically showing that fewer people are giving generally. I think, you know, that is because there are fewer opportunities to fundraise, and I think those, we are seeing the impact of people not traveling into office spaces, the impact of events being cancelled, the impact of the lack of opportunity of being able to ask in the normal ways that we would. Some of that has been able to be substituted through, you know, digital and online, but not direct replacement. But I think what we are tending to see, and this is the good story, the good news story, is that fewer people are giving, but those that tend to give are giving as loyally and as regularly as they ever have been. I think what you will probably see over the year is that the cancellation rates for direct debits and the retention and continued gift of close supporters are probably going to have record levels, I think, across the board. And that is fantastic. And that is, as I say, it's probably the most inspiring and positive thing around kind of fundraising during the pandemic, is seeing how loyal supporters are continuing to support the causes that they care about, as well as giving to NHS charities or giving to new organisations or to emergency appeals that they maybe had never given to before. We're also seeing there was some there was some research that came out from the Charity Commission last week, I believe, which talked about general levels of trust and awareness of charities and the charity sector. So the Charity Commission has tracked those two things over the last 15 years or so. And the levels of trust and the levels of awareness of, I'm trying to remember whether it was awareness of the charity sector or importance of the charity sector, one of those two things. But one of those two things, and the level of trust, was at the highest rate that it had been for years. So I think what we're also being mindful of is it's not just about our relationship with our supporter, is that there's a wider context that's happening. And, you know, they are seeing more generally the value of charities. They are seeing more generally the purpose of organisations and the need to support them because of what we are going through. And I think looking outside of our relationship with that supporter and seeing more generally what's happening in the world is a really important thing generally for supporter retention and engagement. And part of that, I think the tricky bit from now on in, although it has been there over the last year, is as we come out, hopefully, of what has been more of the health side of the pandemic, we are going to be more entering into the economic consequences of last year and this year. You know, the furlough scheme is going to be coming to an end, I imagine, permanently over the next year or so, over the next month. So what's happened, more people are going to be made redundant, people are going to be on reduced incomes. All of this is going to have to be taken into account in terms of retention and stewardship. And more than ever, it is about, going back to what we said at the beginning, I'm trying to understand individual people and their situation. Some people are going to be coming through the pandemic with more money than they've had for the last 10 years because people have built up savings, people haven't been spending money on commuting, people have sold up their house and moved out of London. At the same time, people are going to have be coming into this situation in a worse situation where they have lost their jobs. They have, you know, potentially inflation looks like it's kind of going to be on the rise. So we're not all in the same storm. Sorry, we're not all on the same boat, but we are in the same storm. And the more that we can understand, I'm going to stretch this analogy, the more that we can understand the different boats that our supporters are in, the better that we are going to be able to be providing them with the best retention, the best stewardship, and the best donor care that we can over the coming months.
Yeah, I think, and that comes back to understanding who our donors are and asking them, or finding ways to understand more, and potentially segmenting into different groups so that we're communicating with them in the right way. Helen, do you have anything to add against what Daniel and Elisabeth have said about probably the direct debit cancellations and seeing a reduction in that?
Nothing specific that's different, but to just, I guess, add support. Yes, our cancellation rates, obviously they have been down because acquisition has been less, but if you look at cancellations on traditional supporters, yeah, it's much lower than it has been. And yeah, we know from like the COVID research that we've done that throughout, really, the responses to giving from from warm supporter bases has been really high. So yeah, just that's exactly what we've seen internally at our end.
Thanks. Thinking about strategies that work particularly well, we've got some questions coming in that are quite specific around channels. So Sam Wiley asks about online donors that opt out of email. What's the best communication channel that we should work with? There are others talking about devices specific to raffle donors or cash donors. So in terms of strategies or the ways that we approach retention and stewardship programs, what do you find works really well in those kinds of situations, or generally across the board? Elisabeth.
Yeah, I think with online opt-out donors, we just, well, for us, we don't take telephone numbers, so really the key is just post, and then beyond that, I mean, we kind of know our audience. We send our dispatches, our quarterly magazine that I spoke about, but then beyond that as well, it complements stuff that we use in recruitment as well. So we have press ads, we have our insert which goes into national press, and we know that actually about 50% of donors who give to that insert are warm donors, and so we kind of just try and touch them in all those different areas that we can. We obviously have other recruitment tools such as TV and radio and stuff like that, but I think it's just kind of getting them in the ways that you know, those places that you know your donors go to. We know a lot of our supporters read a lot of national press, and so we put the inserts there, and we know which publications work for our donors. So I think it's just about kind of trying to get to them in other ways, in ways we can. And then I think as well, with thanking especially, so kind of that first communication, if you can't email them apart from a transactional email, maybe send them a really nice thank you letter, send them a thank you card. So we have donors who opt out completely of post of everything for marketing reasons. So instead of even sending our thank you letter, we'll send them a handwritten card. It costs a little bit more to do. It's been a really a hard process to set up, but now it's working really well. But actually it costs a bit more, but we don't then send them anything else. So it's worth it. It's worth sending that really personalized thank you, so that it's their kind of it's their first impression of us after they've given to us. So I think that would be my advice there.
Right. And Daniel, do you think as well in terms of channel, what about in terms of message? You've acquired them on one message. Do you think it's the same? Do you do the same tack for retention, or do you try something different?
I probably don't know this as in depth as Elisabeth does, just because I don't do it as part of my day job, I guess. So these are more kind of just reflections from what I see generally, rather than being in the midst of actually having to do it myself. I mean, I guess the main thing is to try to build it around the person as much as possible, rather than make them fit into what you're doing. I think the messages do change a little bit for the different channels, and I think that is often to do with the immediacy of what you are asking them to do. So, you know, if it is an emergency appeal, for example, that you are slotting in, then sometimes the more immediate ways of asking and responding is a better and more is a more kind of is a quicker and more responsive way of doing it. You know, it is hard, you know, so as Elisabeth said, things which are direct, which people are going to hear or look at. So, you know, on the radio, DRTV, an emergency appeal in a newspaper, things work differently in you know, newsletters and in other forms of communication. the key thing with all of it is there's probably not one right answer. The key thing is try it, test it, learn from it, ask your supporters. If what you're doing is sitting together as your fundraising team and making the decision, the likelihood is, as in, that you will miss things. You should be trying to make that as much as possible with the donors in there and the supporters in there as much as possible. So whether that's through informed by tracking the activity that they have done, so you're bringing that real life tracking in, whether that's informed through focus groups and feedback and comments and reflections that you've had from your supporters, build that in, but make sure that it is based as much as possible from that real life insight, because that's how it will be tailored and most responsive, and the channels and the messages will be most positive and most engaging, I think.
Yeah, and I completely agree with that. And I think the insight as well, it can be just as simple as what they're given to. So if your supporters given to a Yemen appeal, then thank them from a staff member who's worked in Yemen. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's just, yeah, really simple stuff like that. If your supporters given via online, then you might not send them like a really long form letter in the way you might if they've responded to a long form insert. Thank them in the way, and yet kind of continue to communicate with them in the way that they've given to you, and engage with them kind of in the way they're engaging with you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. We're actually coming to the end of the time that we have, and it's gone so quickly. Thank you so much for all of your input. We've got so many more questions, as always happens, that would be great to cover off. I don't know, hopefully we can answer some of those and send those out to the people, to the attendees of the session today, and maybe in a written format instead. So we've also covered off a lot of the questions I think that have come through in one way or another through the discussion that we've had today. Thank you so very, very much for your time, Daniel, Elisabeth and Helen, to talk through retention and stewardship. It's such a big topic and so many things to talk about and think about. Hopefully you found this interesting. We'd really appreciate it for the people who attended the session today if you could complete a feedback form for us. We will send that out through email, but for those with mobile phones handy, mobile phones out, you can scan this QR code that's on the screen, and it's 5 questions just to see what you thought about today's session, and look to see how we may be able to improve sessions going forward. We will look to improve the subtitles, because I know that they didn't come through for everybody. They're coming through for me, but maybe that's because I'm the presenter. So we'll look at a better way of doing that going forwards. But anything else, please let us know on that survey. A few other things to scan. Come along to our next webinar. That's on forecasting and budgeting in individual giving. That's on the 7th of September. That's a half an hour webinar, and Helen, our lovely Helen, will be talking through different techniques in forecasting and budgeting to support your individual giving fundraising. And finally, I mentioned at the very beginning that there is a report to complement today's webinar. That report is available now. Scan this QR code and you'll go through to an order form where you can order that and receive an email with a link through to that report, all being well, and technology working well. So finally, just to say really a huge thank you to everybody that's participated today, for everybody who's asked a question and listened in to what we've had to say on retention and stewardship, and of course to Daniel, to Elisabeth and to Helen, and Emma, who's been beavering away in the background to help today run as smoothly as possible. I hope you have a very good afternoon, stay cool, and we look forward to seeing you on the 7th of September. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.